Hi everyone and welcome to Think Up, and today we're going to be discussing an article which was on hbr.org under the title Why Do So Many Incompetent Men Become Leaders? In fact, funny enough, when I first read that title I got the words the wrong way around. It was why do so many men become incompetent leaders, but in fact it's the other way around, because I think the insinuation is that it's incompetent men becoming leaders as opposed to men becoming leaders who are then incompetent. But anyway, that an existential crisis way aside, I'd like to welcome Christy and Sarah. And so let's dive into this topic. And we don't necessarily need to talk about the article at all, but give me your first thoughts when you saw the post that I made. What was your initial what went through your mind first of all? And Sarah, I'm going to come to you first.
So my initial reaction was, is John trying to start an argument in the Think Up conversation? I know that you've been quite keen to get people to kind of challenge each other on their thought process. Secondly, really, in terms of leadership, it's something that I'm interested in anyway, having been in and around the boardroom since I was about 20. I've got my own views when it comes to leadership, and I'd actually seen the article before when it came out, so that's partly the reason why I wanted to join the conversation.
Awesome. And Christy, what was your first thoughts?
Okay, so my first thoughts are the article seemed to be confusing leadership and management, and I think it's talking around more managers than leaders. And my second thought was, I don't know how true the article is in terms of those being the traits that leaders fail, or managers fail, whatever failure means. I'm also not convinced that managers are actually there to lead. So most of the managers that I've ever dealt with have been more of a kind of directive role, and kind of keeping the lights on. So one of the questions that I had is, do managers actually fail, or is it related to institutionalized bureaucracy within organizations that actually inhibits change and is designed to maintain the status quo in terms of command and control? I had a lot of thoughts. Like, I've got 3 pages of thoughts that yeah.
Okay, well, and kind of building upon that, and Sarah, I'll come over to you in a second. For my kind of take from the article, linked to what you just said, was there were kind of three bits. One, there was the sentence that says what it takes to get the job done is not just different from, but also the reverse of what it takes to do the job well. And as a result, too many incompetent people are promoted to management jobs and promoted over competent people. That's one thing that I noticed. The second one was that most of the character traits that are truly advantageous for effective leadership are predominantly found in those who fail to impress others about their talent for management, which I found quite interesting, and it seems to support your take on leaders versus managers. Sarah, you in the Think Up comments, you actually pointed out that the title and the article are 2 different things. So almost the article is not linked to the title. Tell me a bit more about that.
I think they are. I think the title was sort of fairly misleading. It's a little bit clickbaity, really, in terms of the title. But the content of it is around. It goes into more detail about the traits that lead to kind of good leadership, and I don't necessarily think that is just.
Oh, we seem to have lost Sarah. We've lost your audio. So I'm going to build upon that and save the day on that point. That Christy, I think what Sarah was saying was that the clickbaity type of thing is I mean, that's what journalists are supposed to do, right? But it's important for them to get people to read the article. But But I think that in the Think Up comments, Sarah said that that she agrees that confidence holds a lot of people back, women in particular. But she thinks that we're in an era where younger generations expect to be led by people with emotional intelligence, and they won't stick around otherwise. And she said that people of my age will leave jobs if they are surrounded by egomaniacs and narcissists. But she reckons that bordering behaviour isn't going to be disappearing for a few more years yet. Do you find that that's do you resonate with that point?
Look, I think to an extent that's true. Yeah, people. I've definitely changed jobs because I didn't really have any respect for the person that was my manager or leader or whatever you want to call them. So I left rather quickly. But I guess it depends on personal circumstance and stuff as well. So I've read a lot of articles that are like, people don't leave companies, they leave bad bosses. I don't necessarily think that's true, because I've seen a lot of people stick around in jobs that they're unhappy with, and part of the reason is to do with their boss, part of it's to do with work, and then like that. So I think there's a whole range of things. For me, if I didn't like my boss and I didn't respect them, it makes it very hard for me to do what they want me to do. So I would consider leaving, but I don't think that everybody is the same. Yeah.
One of the things that you said in your comments in Think Up, which I wanted to build upon, was you said, is it really the 3 personality traits that largely explain failures of managers, or is it linked to outdated processes and practices that are institutionalized to maintain the command and control mechanisms? And that point is huge, actually, because it kind of shifts the focus away from a gender situation into the system itself. How much to blame is the system itself?
Yeah. So my other thought when I read that title as well was, it's not just incompetent, or it's not just men that can be incompetent leaders. It's women as well, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't think that focusing on gender is very useful. What I think is more useful is, instead of going, well, like, because of these 3 traits managers fail, what would be more relevant would be to sit back and start asking, well, what are some things that we can actually do that would set people up for success and that would encourage them to succeed, or to be more effective in a managerial managerial leadership role. Rather than a blanket statement like that. But, yeah.
I like that. And actually I've said it a few times on Think Up calls, but it's kind of being the lighthouse instead of the tugboat. So we accept that in the last 100 years or more, there's been an extreme ratio weighting towards male leaders, and so statistically, the volume of incompetence is going to be higher amongst males versus females, due to the fact not only that there's more males than females, but also the structure of how people become senior is potentially flawed in itself. And however, what you're saying is that respectfully to that aside, how could that actually change and move forward? As I think Sarah might be rewiring herself in. Sarah, can you still hear and speak?
I can hear you now. I've been still for ages, and now I can hear you. I'm so sorry. It's definitely my Wi-Fi.
Yes, it's definitely your Wi-Fi. Yeah, and how many people are using it. So, Sarah, we were speaking about solutions to this, and how, what in your head do you see good leadership to be? Assuming that we're all in agreement that management and leadership are 2 different things. How do you define good leadership?
For me, I think it's a couple of things, really. Ethics and moral standing, I think, stand out for me. I think people, your values are really important, and that often leads to how you behave in the workplace. So I think having a leader who has good a good moral code makes a difference to me. Someone that's able to have the soft skills, so be able to care for the team that are around them and to be supportive when necessary, but also to be able to give really clear clarity in terms of the direction of the team and the organisation. So those three things for me are really important.
That's good. And Christy, would you relate to those? Would you share those?
For me, I think as well. Can you hear me?
Sorry, I can now.
Yeah, no, I definitely do. I mean, like obviously, if there's a misalignment of value with the person who's your leader, it does make it very difficult to follow them. So there has to be that kind of value alignment. One of the other things that I think is really important is for them to be able to set, I guess, a vision that creates alignment as well, so there's a very clear direction, a very clear vision, and then help people to understand how they contribute to that. So what's their role in actually contributing to that, so you kind of feel an engagement and I guess ownership of that vision.
Yeah, I concur with that. It's interesting that in terms of leadership traits, the article mentions that there are some kind of these potentially dysfunctional leadership traits are what has demonstrably made some of the world's greatest leaders in the place that they are. And in fact, to paraphrase the article, Thomas, the author, says that it's a little odd that so much of the recent debate over getting women to lean in has focused on getting them to adopt more of these dysfunctional leadership traits. Now, I'm not sure whether or not Thomas understands the concept of leaning in as much as the original kind of thinking around it was, but how do we feel, and Sarah, I'll pass over to you first, do you feel that sometimes some women in business feel that they need to adopt the type of overconfident traits, let's say, or the bullish, more historically testosterone-fueled traits to become leaders? Do you feel that?
Yeah, I think that probably historically many women have felt they've had to take on those more masculine traits to get ahead. And I still feel that from personal experience, there are still women that I've met who still behave in those ways. Again, as I mentioned in the post, I think there's a shift towards more soft skills, both for men and for women. I often talk about how I don't necessarily think people change that much from the playground, and some of the behaviours that happen within a school environment in terms of the bullies, the introverts, the extroverts, often they just get older and they end up working in offices. So I think that having had, from personal experience, having had some fantastic male and female bosses, and in equal measure having had some quite poor male and female bosses, I think that everybody needs to be more transformational in their leadership. I think there is difference between the manager element and the senior leadership, but I think everybody can have leadership traits, because if it's about making people feel like they belong in a team and you're all working to the same goal, I think actually if we all if we all behaved as leaders in the workplace, then we'd probably all be a little bit happier. So I think 100%, I have definitely seen some toxic femininity, as well as toxic masculinity in workplaces. So yeah, I think, but I believe things are changing. And as much as what I said in the post, really, I think younger people my age and below are expecting a lot more from their bosses.
Yeah, I'm also enamored by the fact that if you're in the younger category, then I am too, pretty much. So yeah, people like us and below are now young. We're young now.
Yeah,
I'm right with them. I'm happy with that. But not to trivialize your point, which is a very good point, is I also have seen as many good and bad female leaders as good and bad male leaders. I do notice some similarities in when things go wrong. For instance, when there's a destructive male manager, it has consistently been based on what is commonly seen to be linked by how testosterone impacts male decision making, or from a neuroeconomic perspective. And I've also, when female leaders have had more destructive qualities or suboptimal qualities, there has been a set of characteristics that are commonly linked to the more feminine aspects. And so these are features and flaws in both genders that actually comprise into good and bad leadership. So gender agnostically, it's just good and bad leadership. I've always thought that the difference between a leader and a boss is someone who, when things go wrong, will blame the team, and and when things go right, the boss will take the credit. Whereas a leader, when things go wrong, the leader will protect the team, and when things go right, the leader will reward the team. And an even more simple term of saying that is that bosses are people that tell the time, and leaders are people that are watchmakers. And that's my view of that. Christy, bearing in mind you've got pages of notes of this, and you've probably thought more about this point than certainly more than I have, but I thought about it quite a bit. But which of all of your points, all of the things in your head around this topic, if you were to prioritize the top one thing that is the biggest issue that should be addressed, what would you say wins in the priority list, if there is a priority one?
Okay, so I guess one of the things would be the question around, is simply being competent sufficient to be a good leader? I don't think it is. And then so when you go and do an interview with people, you know, some people are very, very good at presenting themselves in an interview, you know, like they come across as being very confident, and they may have a level of competence, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to translate into that specific role. So how do you actually go about figuring out and I guess making that separation or making that judgment from an interview basis of, is this person, just because they're competent and confident, going to be good in this role? So like, how do you actually break that down?
Yeah, and on that point, actually, are we talking about competence in terms of doing the job? And if the job is to be a leader, then surely it's about leadership competence, as opposed to, let's say it's an accounting firm, knowing lots about accounting. That's the thing that I've noticed, that the people who I've seen to become in charge historically were people who had just either been in the job longer than everyone else,
yes,
or they had more letters after their name, or they were good at that particular task or set of tasks, which is very different from running a company and engaging people and enabling people to believe. Sarah, what's your view on the competence versus confidence type of thing?
I think that just because you're confident in a role doesn't mean you're confident to be a line manager. Sometimes I think it comes down to money. So, you know, people want to buy a house, they want to do certain things, and therefore they work really hard to get promoted. And they get promoted because they're able to say the right things in an interview and all those kind of things, but actually they don't have the skill set to lead or manage people. I think it is a particular skill set to be able to direct and lead a team, to enthuse people, to make them feel they want to achieve and be better than they are. So I think that sometimes is an issue, because just because you're really good at managing a spreadsheet or whatever it is you're doing in your particular role, it doesn't necessarily mean you're able to put your ego aside and to lead a team. I've seen that often. So for me, because of the environments that I've worked in, I spent quite a lot of time in the public sector, and therefore you get a huge amount of training when it comes to line management and leadership, because of the kind of things that you have to do. Whereas now I'm back in the private sector, you can tell they haven't invested in their managers, because that's where you get that kind of those really negative behaviours. So people moaning and all that kind of stuff, it all sort of breeds and gets, bigger and bigger. So I think that, there needs to be more investment in the line management element.
Yeah, Christy, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think, I think people can grow into a role. I've worked at a place previously where they offered training for people who were just new coming into managerial positions. But you couldn't get the managerial position unless you had experience being a manager, and you couldn't access that training unless you were a manager. So it kind of, it made it very difficult for people to actually kind of progress. So one of my thoughts around that as well was how do you actually provide that guidance and mentorship for new managers to grow and to learn, and actually support them in that role as well, and on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've got a kind of, it's a paradox, or there's something, it's a dichotomy or an oxymoron, something inside my thinking process about this that I can't reconcile. And so maybe both of you can help me with this. Today I'm going to do a thought of the day. I've restarted my thoughts of the day, and the reason I've restarted them is because I stopped them because I wasn't certain that anyone found them of any value, and actually I wanted to provide value, and so I didn't realize that anyway. I'm restarting them because I've got several dozen people who've privately messaged me saying, can you restart these thoughts of the day, because they help me think about something differently. So I've restarted them. Anyway, today's thought of the day is going to be about being enough. And the conclusion is going to be that actually you are enough the way you are. And a lot of the time we think that we're not enough in multiple capacities. So I'm going to kind of explain my view of being enough. That's that one. But on the other hand, if someone who is massively incompetent as being a leader thinks that they're enough, and they actually are competent to be a good leader, that I can't work out how to reconcile these things, because what I don't want to do in my thought of the day is enable people who aren't enough to think that they are, but I do want everyone to know that they're enough. And if you can help me with that, Sarah, over to you first. Thanks in advance.
Gosh. I think anyone can be a leader if they put the work in. I think the enough thing is really important. Actually, I just did an event last week, and it was all around. So I'm part of a group that supports women reach to realise their full potential, so they can move into sort of leadership positions. And often, so I've talked about this before about imposter syndrome. And so there's a lot of people, men and women, who absolutely should be in leadership positions because they don't feel like they're enough, and they think they're lucky every time they do something incredible, and they think that's just luck. It isn't down to actually their hard work and their ability. A lot of the work I do is around helping and mentoring people so they do feel like they're enough in order to apply for those positions, as opposed to the people who think they're enough but they're not competent and get into those senior positions. So I think that there's an element of, I think, yeah, absolutely, tell people that they're enough, because you're not going to get those senior positions to leave it as well. That's you can't. So when I'm having progressed significantly over the last sort of 4 years in my career, that has been through my own personal work, to having been at practitioner level, and been line managing since my 20s. And actually, in terms of what Christy's saying, 100%, I had no idea what I was doing when I was 26 and managing people that were older than me. Whereas now, the other side of 40, I feel confident, having been that practitioner level for quite some time, that when I am directing teams and managing people, I'm not just randomly asking people to do tasks that I wouldn't do myself. And that gives me that authenticity and that credibility when I'm leading a disparate team of varying different roles. So I think continue doing what you're doing, your thoughts of the day, because I think that will help the people that are already really senior and are incompetent, and everyone around them knows they're incompetent, and because of the competency of the people around them, that organisation hasn't capsized yet. You're not helping them. The people that you're speaking to are the people like me who actually just needed a little bit of confidence in themselves to kind of get themselves over the line. So I think what you're doing is great.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate it. It's interesting because one of the points that you mentioned, which I think is really critical here, is that the imposter syndrome is, just because someone has an imposter syndrome doesn't mean that they are going to be a bad leader. And so the things are unlinked. Their leadership capacity and competency is unlinked to their biases inside their mind, the thinking process that says that they may not be, and they're two separate things. And Christy, do you feel that I don't know if you want to build on that point at all, but I have an alternative way of asking that, which is it important to help bad leaders become better leaders, or is it better that other people take their place?
Okay, so I guess it depends how bad they are, right? So just on Sarah's point, like, that's awesome, that stuff that you're doing in terms of helping people to get a bit more confidence. Some of the reading that I've done in regards to why fewer women applying for leadership roles is because there is, and I notice this myself, is I'll look at a job description, and if I don't meet about 95% of the criteria, I go, no, I'm not going to be able to do that. So in general, women, tend to want to be able to meet about 80% of it, whereas men, if they meet 50% of it, they'll go ahead and apply. So I think, like, how do you change that, first of all? In regard to, do you replace them with someone else? Sometimes, yeah, that might be the best option. Move them out. If they are that bad and they've been allowed to continue in a role that they really are that bad, I mean, that's kind of an indication of systemic failures within that organisation in terms of being able to actually manage their people. And whether it is a result of, they're friends with their boss and their boss is looking after them, or their boss is just blissfully unaware. Because, quite often there's lies that get told and misinformation that kind of passed up and down. And I think that it probably won't be too far away where the traditional organizational structures that we have now, given pace of technological change, the way people are working, and a whole range of things, I think organizations that are structured along typical command and control, I think there'll be a fairly big shift in business models and how they actually work.
Yeah,
I don't know if
think so too. It does. I think so too. By the way, Sarah's point about being a line manager when you were younger, I was as well. I became a manager at my parents' business when I was really young. And if I were to say the difference between the first 23 years of my career and the second 23 years of my career, and I mean, I'm saying, because I started working for my dad when I was kind of 3, 4, 5 years old. Just doing stuff in the background, pricing up stock, cleaning the bins, sweeping the floors, cleaning the toilets. Yeah, I know you could call it child labor, but and the fact that I'm mixed race as well, there's all manner of massive issues that provides, but nonetheless, so late teens, I was already a leader inside the organization, not through nepotism, but because I'd already worked there for 15 years, right? So I was actually kind of one of the most senior members of staff. But one of the difference between the first bit and the second bit of my career in terms of leading is that I didn't care about how people felt at all for the first decade and a half of leading. It never occurred to me that people had a different feeling about something that was happening than I did. So if I said to someone, well, okay, well, this week we're going to have to pull an all-nighter because we've got to get this product out the next day, and so cancel, Christmas is cancelled, call your loved ones and tell them that you'll see them in a few days' time, and then I would just kind of like march off and go, this is it, And then I'd look behind me, and like half the people had kind of like disappeared, and it's like, where do they go? And I would give crazy instructions to people that I just never kept. It didn't once occur to me that other people had independent feelings at all. Whereas my emotional intelligence before that was relatively high in other areas of my life. It turned out that in leading, I was really unemotionally intelligent. And so taking the playground analogy of you are the person you were, or similar to the person you were on the playground. In the playground, aside from the fact that I was pretty much constantly destroyed by bullies, in the playground, my personality was the guy that went and picked up the people who'd been pushed over and rescued the people or tried to rescue the people that were being as bullied as I was. And that was my playground version. Whereas when I became a leader, I didn't incorporate that at all. I almost became the bully, almost, which I'm ashamed about. But I never in a way that hurt anyone. Hopefully, certainly not physically, but also the mentally side of things. I've tried to identify the people that I've hurt over my life and actually found them and apologized to them. But my second half of my career was very much basing my leadership on how people were actually feeling and what they were then doing with those feelings, and trying to find some form of syntax of resonance that worked across the board. And it makes me super sensitive now to bad leaders, of which I spend a lot of my life around trying to help, because it's heartbreaking, because I actually can see myself when I was 20 in them, even if they're much older. They may be 35, 40, 45, 55, and I'm looking at them going, I recognize this person. This was me 26 years ago. I know this person. What happens here is you lose everyone and your company goes to shit. That's what happens. Just so you know, I'll play the tape to the end for you. You definitely lose everyone and everything, and it goes to shit, for sure, 100%. Where can I find a bookmakers that will take that bet, you know? Sarah, what's your in conclusion of this, and you can speak either to the points that we've made or any other points, because I'm conscious of time. What would you say in closing is your conclusion summary of anything we've discussed?
Just from the way you described your journey it's not that dissimilar to mine. I think when you talk about that emotional intelligence, because certainly when I started line managing in my 20s, I was just kind of, I guess, emulating the leaders that are around me, which were essentially just do it and shut up. Which that not in a brief version, that's essentially what my line management style was, until I moved into a different role and had a different boss, and realised that did not lead to an effective team. So that kind of transactional leadership, especially when you're in a creative environment, doesn't actually get you where you need to be. So I think that leadership is actually a journey, and I do believe that anybody can be a leader if they've obviously got the skills. I mean, clearly, if you don't know what you're talking about and you don't know the area of business you're in, then of course that's ridiculous. But if you're strategic enough to know where you want the organisation to go to, I think anyone can to learn to be a leader, but you actually have to be open to that whole 360-degree element, and to have that self-awareness.
Yeah.
So the best bosses that I've ever had have been the ones that have got that element of self-awareness, or are able to not take themselves too seriously.
Yes.
I think,
yeah.
And I genuinely, the comment I made in the group, I believe that. I do think things are changing, but it will take a long time. Ironman's very big, it's multinational, and the boardroom is full of white middle-aged men, and they're in their mid-50s. They're not going to be retiring anytime soon, so it will take a while for it to shift.
Yeah, it's funny, I'm trying to not be too misogynist about this, which is the opposite of misogyny, but from a misandry perspective, I try not to bash the white male or largely the male leadership side too much. But the generation, there is a generation of the slightly overweight white 55-year-old male old boys network is actually coming to an end, just numerically. So there is that, you know, and it's the old guard, you know. I'm actually slightly more concerned about the new guard than I should be, because I think I've seen that narcissists can come in all shapes and sizes, and I've met as many female narcissists as I have met male ones.
And I think, and to me, that's a complete fair point, I think, in the fact that I believe in a gender split or a diverse boardroom, and it's that whole, like, don't be a dick. So I think, you know, I have male and female friendships both within work and in my personal life, because I believe in that diversity of thought. So the best teams that I've worked in have been when there's been a healthy split of male, female, and other protective characteristics, and the majority have been decent human beings who you want to hang out with, and certainly not narcissists, because nobody really wants to. It's good to be self-aware but not self-absorbed.
That's right. And I'm a narcissist magnet, so yeah, I resonate with that quite strongly. I walk around with a signpost pointing at my head saying, I will give you everything and continue to, despite the fact that you'll crucify me in the process, and I'll keep doing it because of my abandonment issues from being given up at birth. So if I'm trying to just make the neon less bright on that and spot it more. Christy, in conclusion,
at least you know it though.
True.
Sorry, I was just going to say, at least you're aware of it now. Awareness is the key, you know.
That's right. It's taken 46 years to get to the awareness stage. The next one is to then make the adjustments. Christy, over to you in conclusion.
Okay, cool. So, like, I think it's good, Jonathan, that you've recognised and you're self-aware of previous failings. So, shows that you can learn. Good job. But I was going to say, like, people don't remember what you said. They remember how you make them feel, right? And that old adage of treat other people how you want to be treated, I don't actually think is true. I think what is more true is treating people how they want to be treated. So you actually have to spend time getting to know people and figuring out what their needs are, what their desires are, how they like to communicate, and, you know, like how they like to receive direction. So, and I've rarely had people do that to me.
Good for you, and good for you. That's, you're in a good position there. Right. Okay. So I'm going to now wrap up, and thank you very much for your time. And for those watching, and there may be some slight audio issues when you're listening to this, but bear with it. The content is worth the audio issues, and sometimes in life, the audio issues are the things that we focus on, but actually the main thing is to keep the main thing. And so I'd like to thank you both very much. It means a great deal to me that you spend your time, especially so early on a Monday morning, and well, so late on a Monday evening for Christy. And I shall see you both soon. And I really, genuinely thank you.
Thanks for doing it. It's lots of fun. So
okay,
thanks John. Thanks,
Bye.
Christy.
Cheers, guys.